Good afternoon, guys. Recording class day.
I read one of your short stories.
You did?
Yeah, it was the unavoidable evil thing.
Oh, yeah, it's like an excerpt of it?
Yeah.
Thanks.
It started off all nice and innocent, and then it kind of took a twist. I was like, wow.
I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I just do. Yeah.
I'm going to take a look. I'm not sure about
So, like, how do you improve
Sorry. Headlight. Let's still check. How'd you do on the rest?
Dad, honey, I worry about you sometimes.
No shit.
Did you hear her? She's thinking about me.
Oh. And I'm trying to
Oh, why? You don't deserve
Just remind me, keep your activities.
I just did. No, you can't. Get your foot out of my chair. Kristen. Yeah,
What?
26.
Yes.
Yes.
It's really well
There's some point. You.
I had the last one. We're not back there. Right, he's probably pointing away from us so we can, because he knows where we are. I'm just right here.
So I was thinking for like 20 minutes. So we're sitting down. It was like 5 minutes.
Hey, Lucas.
No, you gotta get up there. What did you say?
I told you to force it.
Oh no, that's
I did my English score went up. All my scores went up. But I still have
Did you find them? Got you on camera? What do you bring away?
You might not.
Turn it off.
Alright guys, go ahead and get started on this and I'll be with you right after 10 minutes 30.
Right behind us.
Well, yeah, because they have
Yeah, there's only 4. Plus 4 days is already. Okay, so
Man, goes to the library.
Take them back, no charge.
well, then I'll have 9 different
Fails once.
I don't know, I feel like I'm having a really good. Look at you recording?
Yeah, he wants me to keep him in shot.
Okay.
Okay.
I hear when you were acting, you have to look. Is it on right now?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, guys, go and get started on the writing, please.
And now I can take it next time without worrying about the
I think I should have this.
They had to go to the bathroom.
That was not reason to get all of that.
It was if you were missing.
I got 20s.
All right, guys, maybe just 2 minutes on our response here. I'm going to get going because we lost a little bit. Lunch rearrangement.
Why are we doing this? Lucas?
Maybe another 30 seconds or so. Just finish up whatever thoughts you're on. Okay, so would anybody like to share what they put down? I know some of these can be personal, that's fine, you don't have to feel like you need to share, but if you're open to it, go ahead.
I try to smile more and
All right, just try to appear more friendly, or, yeah, absolutely. Self-presentation goes a long way. What else? Yes?
I study so then I can gain knowledge for my future.
Yeah, all right, good answer. All right. What else, guys? Yes, go ahead.
I try to make sure that I learn something new every day that I can apply to life other than like an assignment.
I like that, and I was hoping that we would either follow that or I would end up bringing that up. Because especially on days like today where we're getting back like ACT scores and academics seem so in our face, you know, it's important to realize that that's not always going to be around. I mean, obviously you want to keep learning no matter how old you are, but eventually you're going to be somewhere where you won't get a grade for everything, right? It's just going to be how you live your life and what kind of person you are. And that's the kind of stuff that I really want to look at, yeah.
So how to become a better student and stuff by studying more every day, try to get my grades up.
Yeah, and so because that's so kind of relevant in your lives right now, of course you're going to be focused a lot on academics, but then as you get older, that stuff's going to start to go away a little bit, and you'll just be looking at self-improvement for the sake of self-improvement. That's kind of the discussion we had between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation a while back. All right, so we're going to be looking at Age of Enlightenment stuff today. We looked at Native American yesterday, and like I told you yesterday, we're going to be burning through this unit. All right, we won't spend much time in any one of these areas of literary movements. Okay, so let's look and remind ourselves what the Age of Enlightenment looked like. If you remember, if you have your notes, this was from 1600, 1800. So just after, you know, the main European settlers came over, and then we started like making our own cities and towns and establishing governments, and then of course the break in between when we were British citizens to when we became our own American citizens, right? Between 1600 and 1800, they were focused very much on personal growth in political or spiritual arenas. You can tell that by, if you've read anything from Ben Franklin, we've read something of Jonathan Edwards, right? Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Obviously, that's to do with spiritual growth, all right? They grew up at the same time. I don't know if they knew each other, but they grew up at the same time. They were born within a couple of years of each other and ended up kind of going different routes, but they still both had a very strong tie-in with Puritanism. And if you think Puritanism as being the way that Jonathan Edwards thinks about life and Christianity and the sort of sinners in the hands of an angry God rhetoric that we were studying that one time, you can imagine how heavy that would have weighed on somebody growing up in that time. That would have seemed like the only way to live. Okay? Benjamin Franklin kind of rejected that. And he ended up being what's called a deist. Does anybody know what deism is? Okay, you definitely believe in a deity. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, I love it. Either way.
They believe that something created us that they don't really know or have the answer to.
Okay, good. Can you expand on that?
They like look to find God in like nature and stuff instead of like Holy Scripture.
Right, and the underlying facts or the underlying belief behind deism is that they believe there's a God, and they believe that something created the earth and the universe to begin with, but then they just kind of let it go. It's called like a clockmaker God, where the clockmaker makes the clock and then it goes to somebody else's house, and then it just runs. And that's kind of the way that they thought that God existed. They didn't think that God had day-to-day providence, meaning day-to-day input in what happens with your life, right? Or with all of our lives, really. And so he definitely went a different way than Jonathan Edwards. And what did that mean? Well, if he's growing up in this Puritan area and he doesn't really have a heaven or a hell to worry about necessarily, then kind of what's his benefit for self-improvement? Well, his benefit for self-improvement is just that intrinsic motivation. How do I self-improve just for the sake of being a better person? And see, he devised a list of rules for himself to use. And before we take a look at those, what I'd like you to do is with your group, let's take about 4 to 5 minutes. I want you to come up with a list of rules that you would say this would make you a good person if you followed these rules. Alright, just one paper per group. We'll talk about that and decide what makes you a good person. If you follow these rules, you'll be a good person.
You just have the 2 commandments.
This is Jake just has to read the person, that person.
Could be one word, yeah.
Number one. It's walking I think self-respect.
Self-respect after
But you convey your self-control. Being nice.
Okay, I don't mind.
Yeah, much like that kind of.
It's like smart.
Positive attitude.
Right, what, there's no word.
I thought you were going to say.
Start with number 39.
Be nice to people. Sometimes secrets hang. Because you don't want to like, oh, okay, this is good. Look, you're slowly going this way.
I do it all the time. It doesn't matter what happens. I ride sideways.
I saw it.
That's a week I'm gonna be a good person.
Are you saying that up? I'll listen really fast.
Like follow
I don't know what happened. I mean, that's
Don't lie, cheat, be nice, don't be
okay.
respect
I
elders.
like everything you said.
Something's wrong.
No, not like you did.
I was like,
Integrity. Yeah.
thank you.
All right, guys, we run out of ideas. Okay, so take a minute and count how many you came up with. Okay. About how many did you guys come up with? 9? Did I have more than 9?
11.
11?
I think he's less of
Alright. You got 9? Okay. So now think of this. Think of this. I saw a lot of the same ones, which is pretty good, actually. I'm happy that everybody feels the same way about being nice to other people and that sort of thing. But do you feel like if you had more time, you could write a longer list, or that you would pare that down to a shorter list that said more things within, the little bit of time you had? Like if you could make smaller groups, or larger groups rather, and have fewer rules. Which way do you think that would go?
Shorter.
You have a shorter list maybe with larger groups.
Yeah.
All right, that encompasses more things. But then you lose specificity too, right? Like if I say be nice, and that's my rule, well, sometimes I don't need to be nice. Maybe sometimes it would hurt me to be nice, right? And so I would maybe just want to leave that rule all by itself. Maybe I want some more specificity. So anyway, just something to think about, because we're going to get into Ben Franklin's rules. We're going to take a very brief look at Jonathan Edwards' rules, which you can imagine those are two very different things. We're going to talk about those for a little bit. All right, so first, before we get into Ben Franklin stuff, let me show you Jonathan Edwards' rules. Ben Franklin actually came up with 13 rules that he lived by, tried to live by. Would it surprise you at all that Jonathan Edwards had 70 rules that he lived by, or said that we should live by?
7.
What did they all say resolved at the beginning?
It's like him promising himself. I've resolved to do this. Jonathan Edwards had 70 different rules.
I want to know what
How much time did he have?
resolved. He wasn't one.
All right, so we can look at a couple of these really quickly. We can look at a couple of these really quickly and see that they're actually, a lot of them are good rules, Never do anything out of revenge, right? Resolve to be endeavoring to find out fit objects of charity and liberality. So he's trying to make sure that he's charitable, right? And so there's a lot of very specific rules, and he definitely went the specific side of things. When we look at Benjamin Franklin's, you'll see that he's done more of the broad group things. So what I'd like to do with this is that we're going to read this together, fittingly in the Quaker style of reading, where people just take turns whenever the Spirit moves them. And then I will...
Spirit is strong.
No, don't yell. Don't wave your arms. And I will occasionally stop you and ask you questions about it.
What do you think?
I think it's real what? Oh, yeah. I think it's real bad. I think it's just a little overboard to me, but this is a really interesting plan that I think represents him a lot. If you've never read his whole autobiography, you should. Okay, guys, so let's get started. I'll get started and then give you pause, and then you jump in whenever you feel like it's appropriate. And again, I'll stop us probably after every 2 or 3 rules and make sure that we understand what he's saying. All right, so this is his plan for attaining moral perfection. This came from his autobiography, which I was just telling this group, if you've never read, it's a really good read. It's not tremendously long-winded, and it's educational for you for sure. All right, it was about this time I conceived the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. I wished to live without committing any fault at any time. I would conquer all that either natural inclination, custom, or company might lead me into. As I knew, or thought I knew, what was right and wrong, I did not see why I might not always do the one and avoid the other. What's he saying there? Exactly. If you know what's right and wrong, then why not just always do the right thing? That's what he's saying. But I soon found I had undertaken a task of more difficulty than I had imagined. While my care was employed in guarding against one fault, I was often surprised by another. Habit took the advantage of inattention. Inclination was sometimes too strong for reason. I concluded at length that the mere speculative conviction that it was in our interest to be completely virtuous was not sufficient to prevent our slipping. That means we couldn't just want it, right?
What does virtuous mean?
Virtuous means like, that virtue means to have good qualities. Right? So he's saying that it wasn't enough just to want to avoid slipping and breaking the rules, so to speak, that I actually had to work for this. All right, you'll notice also another big difference, another important difference between Jonathan Edwards and Benjamin Franklin, is he never says the word sin. If he ever talks about a sin, so to speak, then he will talk about an error, E-R-R-O-R, right? He never relates it to God in any way. It's always just a fault of his own design. Okay, so he's not sufficient to prevent our slipping, and that the contrary habits must be broken and good ones acquired and established before we can have any dependence on a steady, uniform rectitude of conduct. For this purpose, I therefore contrived the following method.
From the various enumerations of the moral virtues I had met with in my reading, I found the catalog more or less numerous, as different writers included more or fewer ideas under the same name. Temperance, for example, was by some confined to eating and drinking, while by others it was extended to mean the moderating every other pleasure, appetite, inclination, or passion, bodily or mental, even to our avarice, avarice and ambition. I propose to myself, for the sake of clearness, to use rather more names, with fewer ideas annexed to each, than a few names with more ideas, and I included under 13 names of virtues all that at that time occurred to me as necessary or desirable, and annexed to each a short precept which fully expressed the extent I gave to its meaning.
So he's saying he had a hard time deciding whether to go with fewer categories and broad meanings or very specific categories and a lot of rules, right? And he's saying that I took a while to get that balance, that I was able to have temperance, but a lot of people just thought of temperance as not eating too much. All right, well, he decided to include not doing anything too much, doing everything in moderation, okay? Somebody else want to pick up there?
Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. Silence. Speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Resolution. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. Frugality. Make no expense but to do good to yourselves or others. Waste nothing. Industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly. And keep sweet. Justice. Wrong none by doing injury or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Cleanliness. Tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. Tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. Chastity. Humility. Imitate Jesus and Socrates.
Okay, how do those relate to the rules that you came up with? Something similar? Or at least a few of them are similar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet a few of them are similar. It's kind of the same way that you all were talking. Be nice to each other, treat each other with respect, treat yourself with respect, all those things. You did go a little further, with cleanliness and that sort of thing. Just things that you might have come up with had you been given more time or felt more valuable for. My intention being to acquire the habitude of all these virtues, I judged it would be well not to distract my attention by attempting the whole at once, but to fix it on one of them at a time. And when I should be a master of that, then proceed to another, and so on, till I should have gone through the 13. And as the previous acquisition of some might facilitate the acquisition of certain others, I arranged them with that view so they stand as they stand above. Temperance first, as it tends to procure the coolness and clearness of head, which is so necessary where constant vigilance was to be kept, and guard maintained against the unremitting attraction of ancient habits and the force of perpetual temptations. This being acquired and established, silence would be more easy, and my desire being to gain knowledge at the same time that I improved in virtue. In considering that in conversation, it was obtained rather by the use of the ears than of the tongue, and therefore wishing to break a habit I was getting into of prattling, punning, and joking, which only made me acceptable to trifling company, I gave silence a second place. So what's he saying here?
Notice too, it said Jack, remember in the beginning, he was kind of freaked out about the blood and everything, he still is a little bit.
He
It says he
used to listen more rather than speak, and he does speak, he needs to stay away from joking and talking about unimportant things that brings the company and people that don't kind of like help him.
Okay, good. Yeah, he's talking about what he intends to do with silence. He also talked about the order in which he was going to try to approach these. What's he trying to say there? Some are more important than others, or at least some doing those first and focusing on those first would help him establish the other ones quicker, right? And so he decided that temperance was the first and the easiest one to approach because that would help him be silent easier, right? Let's go ahead and skip down to the bottom paragraph there. I made a little book in which I allotted a page for each of the virtues. I ruled each page with red ink so as to have 7 columns, one for each day of the week, marking each column with a letter for the day. I crossed these columns with 13 red lines, marking the beginning of each line with the first letter of one of the virtues. On which line, and in its proper column, I might mark, by a little black spot, every fault I found upon examination to have been committed respecting the virtue upon that day. Flip the page and take a look. There's a sample of how he might have arranged his tracking system. Now, to set up a set of rules, that's one thing. To be so intent on tracking them and making sure that you're not doing these things wrong, that's a whole other level, right? Of making sure that you are morally perfect, or that you are guiding yourself at least toward moral perfection. Maybe you never get there, but you get closer. And so he'd start with temperance, and once he saw that he didn't feel like he had any fault in temperance, he would start focusing on silence. And each week he'd come back through and check and see if he had any black marks, which meant that he had some sort of a fault in that area. Then he would check that off, and then eventually, after he got through all of them, he would go back through and hope to find a completely blank book after 13 weeks. So he did it 4 times a year. That's some serious paying attention to your own qualities and your own abilities. And honestly, that'd be really difficult to be that honest with yourself. Right? Say, oh yeah, I haven't eaten too much. It's Thanksgiving week, but I've stayed in moderation. You know, that'd be difficult, right? Among other things. Okay, so somebody finish out this last paragraph.
I determined to give a week's strict attention to each of the virtues successively. Thus, in the first week, my great guard was to avoid the least offense against temperance, leaving the other virtues to their ordinary chance, only marking every evening the faults of the day. Thus, if in the first week I could keep my first line marked T clear of spots, I suppose the habit of the virtue so much strengthened and its opposite weakened, that I might venture extending my attention to include the next, and for the following week kept both lines clear of spots. Proceeding thus to the last, I could go through a course complete in 13 weeks and 4 courses in a year. And like him who, having a garden of weed, does not attempt to eradicate all the bad herbs at once, which would exceed his reach and his strength, but works on one of the beds at a time, and having accomplished the first, proceeds to a second. So I should have, I hoped, the encouraging pleasure of seeing on my pages the progress I made in virtue, by clearing successfully my lines in their spots till the end. By a number of courses, I should be happy in viewing a clean book after a 13 weeks daily examination.
All right, so what do you think? You think you'd be able to do a book like that using your own rules?
If I had time.
Yeah, time,
I
right?
just feel like it does.
Yes.
There was this book, and it was like about complaining, and it was like a plan that you every time you caught yourself complaining, you had a bracelet and you would switch it to the other wrist. And you would do it every time you caught yourself complaining about something. And you do it for 2 weeks, and it's supposed to help you.
Just have a physical representation of that. Yeah,
So,
that makes
catch
sense.
yourself.
To see how many times you do that. That's cool. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm giving each table 6 papers, which obviously not all of you have 6 people. None of you have 6 people, matter of fact. Take any sheet, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to let you read and respond to this. You should be able to get through at least 3 of them. And then I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes where you're going to respond to it in writing. And then after 3 minutes, I'm going to tell you to pass it around, and you're going to read the next set of questions and the next set of responses and respond to that as well. Does that make sense, everybody? I want you to write it directly on paper. Put your name outside of each of your responses so we can see who wrote what. Okay, 3 minutes is not long, so you got to be quick. Mark, say go. It may be much. Short paragraph would be fine. A couple sentences. Not especially. But something else works better. Just under a minute. Okay, there's our timer. What I'd like you to do is, all the ones that have not been written on, just ignore those for now. I only want you to trade ones that have been written on already. Trade those now. Read other people's questions and those people's responses. You can feel free to disagree with them or agree with them and add on what they have to say. Or you can just answer the question in general. Alright? Another 3 minutes. Marcus, say go.
So do we reply to it or write it on?
You can reply to their response, or you can just answer the question on your own. And feel free to disagree with each other. 1 minute. Okay, time's up. Pass it one more time. Give your brain a second to process the new information before I start the timer. Your hand a break. All right, Mark, stay go. One minute left. Okay, time's up. What I'd like you to do is pass the question back to the original author, the original person who wrote the response. And take a second to read over this and see how that discussion went. Any major disagreements?
Nope.
Okay, what I'd like you to do is, Ashley, make sure that you put these in the tray for me. Just the ones you've written on, leave the other ones on the table, I'll take care of them. Next to the ones you wrote.
Well, it should be because
And then you can leave the chairs down today, I'll take care of that.